No city in America has been at the heart of the fight game quite like Boston. A connection that goes back over 150 years, holding a special magic whenever the biggest fights come through. And tonight, Beantown is once again the center of the fight world as the UFC makes its return with 2 titles on the line, with a superstar in the making, ready to overthrow the powers that be, and a generational talent looking to define his legacy. Featuring a tyrannical champion set on a historical course.
It's game time. Here we go. This is the moment.
With both the longest win streak and the most victories in bantamweight history. A raging force of nature.
Aljo! Holy smoke, Aljamain Sterling!
Who has made it his destiny to rewrite the history books by taking out all comers.
I don't think he's really understanding the reality of what this is going to be. It's going to be a bad night for this guy. You're going to get smashed. My prediction for UFC 292 is first round TKO.
This is the moment I made for.
Yet, the Sugar Show is not a regular contender. He's a radical changing of the guard. A ranging, thrilling 28-year-old phenom with immense power in his hands, marked for greatness.
The Sugar Show!
Holding the highest striking rate in bantamweight history, with a striking accuracy that's second to none.
I am a sniper. I will find his chin. He's the greatest bantamweight of all time. I can go out there, put his lights out. What does that make me?
The time for a new era could be upon us, in a place that has produced plenty of championship moments. First, the women's strawweight division is once again in the custody of a Chinese superstar, a magnum tough champion who surged back to the top of the ranks with merciless ease, taking out back-to-back champions to claim the title, one of the all-time finishes at 115 pounds, explosive from anywhere. And always ready to engage in a war, faces off with a fiery Brazilian contender on a mission of her own. A crippling striker with more finishes at strawweight than anybody else. Descending on Boston to not only put on a show, but to put the rest of the division on notice that a new queen has arrived. History is ready to be made in America's most historic city. It's time to let the fists fly and find out who's left standing alone atop the throne. Live from the sold-out TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts, it's UFC 292, Sterling versus O'Malley, and it starts right now.
You are listening to your UFC 292 preview here on the Lock Betting Podcast. You can follow Lock Betting on Twitter at LockBettingX. That's at LockBettingX. I would quite like a ticket to UFC 292 tonight because we have a very, very stacked card. We don't have that huge fight on the card that features someone like a John Jones or a Conor McGregor. Obviously, these are the big fight cards that people are looking forward to these days. But I think in terms of secondary level pay-per-views that you can have, Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley in the main event is pretty decent. And when you look at the rest of the card, you've got Ian Gary stepping up to the main card. His stiffest test comes against Neil Magny. We have Weili Zhang defending her belt against Amanda Lemous. And we also have Chris Weidman returning. He steps back into the octagon against Brad Tavares, although he is a significant underdog to get his hand raised this evening. We'll begin by talking about the main event, where Aljamain Sterling is the 2-5 favourite to retain his belt, with Sean O'Malley priced up at 2-1 plus 200. The method of victory market has Sterling at 13-2 via TKO KO, 2-1 via submission, and also 2-1 to get it done via a decision. O'Malley is available at 10-3 via TKO KO, which is seen as his best route to victory, being able to land that knockout or TKO shot in this 25-minute period for his championship fight. It's 20-1 for a submission, and he's 8-1 to get it done via a decision. The total round markets see over 2.5 at 4-6 minus 150, with under 2.5 here at 6-5. Under 3.5 and over 3.5 is your 10-11, 10-11 minus 10 line, with under 4.5 at 8-13, over 4.5 at 6-5. Will the fight go to distance? Yes. Priced up at 7-4, so nearly plus 200 on the fight to go to distance here, and no at 4-9. That's shy of minus 200, so not quite getting minus 200 there. You have to lay a little bit more juice than that for this fight to finish inside the distance. So how do I think this one is going to play out? Well, ultimately, I see two ways that it's going to play out. It's going to be Aljamain Sterling stinking the place up, grinding his way to a decision, not getting involved in the striking battle, because this is the first time that Aljamain has actually been at a reach disadvantage, and winning the fight on the scorecards, possibly finding a way to get a submission victory here. But I do think the scorecards is more likely. I don't think he wants to stand up here with O'Malley. The other way it finishes is if Sean O'Malley can actually land that shot, because he should have a sizable striking advantage here. But Sterling is awkward and unconventional enough that it will probably take a few rounds for him to be able to read Sterling, whilst Sterling will also use those few rounds to sort out his timings. And even if Sterling fails on his first couple of takedown attempts, I think he has more than enough time for him to take advantage of the massive grappling edge that he has in order to find a way of winning a majority of the rounds by utilising that remaining time once he has worked out O'Malley and been able to grind out a decision. Now, I don't think there's anyone who will disagree that O'Malley is UFC's golden boy. We were talking about how this is kind of your level 2 card, your level 2 main event, because we know the upper echelon at the moment is John Jones, Conor McGregor, and to maybe a lesser extent, but I would put him up there at the moment, Israel Adesanya. When these three guys are not fighting, it is to me considered a B-level pay-per-view. But this is as high, I think, as a B-level pay-per-view gets. They want O'Malley to find his way into that category because he's an exciting fighter and he has a look and he's marketable and UFC can really get behind him. I understand the golden boy doesn't always fulfill the wishes of the organisation, but UFC is stacking the deck against Sterling in many ways here for UFC 292. Sterling is correct when he says that the UFC did O'Malley a favour in granting him plenty of time to prep for Sterling for this fight. They did O'Malley a even bigger favour in requiring Sterling to turn around from fighting Henry Cejudo in less than 4 months. Knowing how much Sterling has been talking about how difficult this weight cut to 135 is, a quick turnaround is going to be quite difficult for Aljamain Sterling. Plus, he's also 34 years old. That actually makes him the oldest reigning bantamweight champion in the history of UFC. Sterling also has 1 foot out of the bantamweight door, and that isn't retirement, but he has no intention of attempting to regain his belt should he lose it. So if he does end up losing his title, he's not coming back for a rematch or anything. Maybe that lights a fire under him to leave on his own terms, but being ready to move on does create questions as to how difficult Sterling is starting to find this. But I still find it very difficult to look past the fact that he's such a superior ground fighter here in this fight. And there shouldn't be any debate that O'Malley is the superior striker. So getting these two outcomes, one at 10-3 for O'Malley to get the win via TKO KO, whilst getting Aljamain Sterling around about plus 200 to get the victory via a decision, both of those do appeal. O'Malley likes to get his wins early. 9 of his 16 MMA fights have seen him secure a TKO KO in either rounds 1 or 2. He's priced up at 8-1 to win by TKO KO in rounds 1 or 2 as a special request bet that I found looking through the lines this morning. So that definitely appeals to me because the longer the fight goes on and as it enters the championship rounds, it gives Sterling more time to get a read on O'Malley, and that's where I think he can win. There may even be an in-play opportunity here in this fight. I'm going to lean on Aljamain Sterling to get the win via decision, but I would definitely be looking at a hedge on Sean O'Malley, and I'm definitely interested in rounds 1, 2, and maybe even round 3, because I think after that, the gas tank is questionable, and I think that's when Aljamain Sterling will take control and will probably go on to do enough to retain his bantamweight title via the scorecards. Before we move on to looking at a couple of other fights on this card, let me quickly tell you guys about the Sports Gambling Podcast Patreon. Sign up for the Patreon to get access to exclusive contests, including the NFL Win Totals contest with a $1,000 first prize. Besides season-long contests, they also have weekly contests just for Patreons, plus a monthly SGP Stories podcast, completely ad-free and full of behind-the-scenes stories from SGPN. There is even a Discord channel just for patrons. Only you can prevent corporate gambling. Do your part and sign up today. It's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/Patreon if you want to get involved. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/Patreon. We're going to move on to talking about the co-main event. Usually when I do these shows, I just talk about the main 2 cards on the fight. But because I know Ian Garry and his wife, I'm going to touch on that fight as well, because Ian Garry is a very interesting fighter to me. He could be the person who steps up into that column A, that upper tier that I was talking about. He could be somebody who sells fights like a Conor McGregor, like they want Sean O'Malley to do, like a John Jones, like a Israel Adesanya, but he needs to keep on winning. I think for him, it's imperative that he keeps that O, and he faces his biggest challenge today up against Neil Magny. So I am going to also talk about that fight. But first of all, we'll go through this co-main event where Weili Zhang is defending the belt against Amanda Lemous. She is the 4-11 favourite to pick up a win, with Lemous at 2-1. The method of victory market sees Zhang at 11-8 via TKO KO, 9-2 via submission, 3-1 via decision, whilst Amanda Lemous is 9-2 via TKO KO, 11-1 for the submission, and 10-1 via a decision. I expect Weili Zhang to get her hand raised here, but when we're doing these shows, we're talking about sports betting. We're talking about value. We're talking about if we agree with the pricing. That's what we're doing a lot of the time. And I don't think that the gap between these two is as wide as these prices suggest. Lemous certainly has the power to ruin Zhang's day. This does feel like a fight where she'll need to get the KO or she doesn't have a chance of winning. And in my opinion, Lemous just doesn't fight at an elite MMA pace. So if Zhang can take her down or can just get her scrambling, I think that she can wear Lemous out enough so that the fight will end up being one-sided, which ultimately could lead to Zhang getting a knockout. But I still think with Lemous carrying that threat, this is a really close fight, and that makes it fun to watch. Zhang can't really have boring fights, and Lemous looked sensational last time out. I think both women are going to strike and swing for the houses. I think they're both going to get hit a lot. And if that happens, I think Lemous has more power than Zhang and has a real chance of winning. She has more power in her hands, and she actually has better submissions as well. So if Zhang gets wobbled, then Lemous has a chance of finishing her off while she's down on the ground as well. So the only opponent that Zhang has faced who's rivaled the power of Lemous is Jessica Andrade. And Zhang was actually fortunate enough to dispose of her in less than a minute. Jonah Jędrzejczyk's strikes stung more than they actually caused any trouble. But Lemos's punches, they will spark you out. And I'd give her until the championship rounds to be able to find that shot that changes everything once again in this strawweight division. If she can't land it before the championship rounds, then I do think Zhang ends up running out as the winner. But I do think there is significant value on Amanda Lemous at around about 5-2 plus 250. I don't think she's going to get it done on the scorecard. So perhaps a better way to take her would be to take her to win inside the distance. Amanda Lemous to win inside the distance, which is via submission or decision, is priced up at 5-1. So we don't often give out 5-1 plus 500 selections. And this is by no means something that you should be putting a load of money on. It's a sprinkle, but it's where I think the value lies. Sometimes, as I said, in sports betting, it's not about just betting on what you think is going to happen. Because what I think is going to happen is at minus 300. I don't know about the outcome, but I do feel that Weili Zhang will find a way to get a hand raised. However, another scenario that I can also see happening, whilst not as strongly as Zhang winning, but definitely at better odds than plus 500, is priced up at plus 500. And that is Amanda Lemous finding a way to win inside the distance. So that's going to be my selection here for this one. We finally move on to the last fight I'm going to talk about, which is Ian Garry versus Neil Magny. As I said about this card, it is stacked, and I will be posting out all of my plays over at lockbetting.com. That includes a play for the return of Chris Weidman, who is an underdog against Brad Tavares. This is also on the main card, but we're going to finish off by talking about Ian Machido Garry. He is the 1-4 favourite to win against Neil Magny, who is the 3-1 underdog. The method of victory market sees Garry at 6-5 via TKO KO, 7-2 via a submission, and 5-2 via decision. It's 14-1 on Neil Magny by TKO KO, 14-1 via submission, and 7-1 here via a decision. Looking at the odds, the impression that you get is that Ian Garry is being handed a name in order to win impressively on a UFC number card, so UFC 9-2, and on the main card of it as well. So this is what I think is happening, and that's what I believe will happen. Magny's last 3 wins have been underwhelming, and he actually arguably lost to Max Griffin and Phil Rowe, and was likely on his way to losing a decision to Daniel Rodriguez as well before pulling it out late. That isn't even mentioning how one-sided his losses have been as of late. Garry, he looked like a world beater in his last contest against the same Rodriguez, who gave Magny some troubles. However, prior to that, it's fair to say that Garry wasn't looking as impressive as UFC wanted him to. However, I get that MMA maths doesn't work like that in terms of Rodriguez gave Magny trouble and Garry disposed of him pretty easily. But overall, I don't think Magny has the power to make Garry pay a heavy price if Garry gets overconfident. And I just think Garry's confidence is going to grow here as a result of stopping Neil Magny in this fight. I don't think there's any UFC or MMA experts out there that would say at the moment that Ian Garry is the complete fighter. He has many defensive flaws against strikers that can crowd him, but he's been putting in a lot of work to iron that out lately. More than anything, when he gets to move forward, he's been excellent at maintaining his preferred range, which is key for Ian Garry to establish in all of his fights. He never crowds his work. He never falls forward on his strikes. And as such, he's probably going to give very few clinch opportunities away to Magny, which is where Magny wants to fight. If that's the case, given Magny's lack of power in stand-up, I think it's hard to see anything but a dominant performance here for Ian Garry. So this does feel like a hand-picked selection here for Ian Garry to look good. There is no doubt that Ian Garry is a potential superstar and definitely the person who UFC want to come out on top here, which is why they've put him in this position. They want him to succeed. He'll be given every opportunity to succeed. Obviously, some of the social media activity is rubbing people up the wrong way, but ultimately, if this is a guy who likes to travel everywhere with his kid and with his wife and give them that exposure and not hide them away. And if that makes him more comfortable and that makes him enjoy his camp more, enjoy his job more, and he can mix the two things together, then you can't really say that that is a negative. I think it could become a negative if things start to go south, if it starts to become a distraction, if obviously your wife and kid are there and they witness you being defeated or knocked out or whatever it may be, if there is some adversity that comes your way, then suddenly traveling along playing happy families whilst you're trying to knock somebody's head off, but instead it happens to you, doesn't seem to be the right formula for success anymore. But at the moment, despite having a couple of blips earlier on in UFC, not by way of defeats, but just not looking as good as the UFC probably wanted him to look, the last fight, as we're talking about it right now, was completely successful. That was by far Ian Garry's most impressive win in the UFC. And now I believe he's been put in a position to win again and win convincingly. I would be concerned if he isn't able to establish his striking game, if he isn't able to control that distance, that Magny may be able to find a way to grind out a decision. Magny is unreliable, and I hate picking fights he's in, but he can also be a spoiler for young prospects, and he can make the fight quite ugly if Ian Garry isn't able to control the distance, isn't able to establish octagon control and fight the kind of fight he wants and the type of fight that he can win. So it could get ugly and it could get difficult, but ultimately I'm going to go with the next golden boy. The best night possible for UFC would be if Sean O'Malley and Ian Garry both got their hand raised tonight and looked good in doing so in the process. Closing out with your lock on the show, as I said, I will be putting out a card for this pay-per-view over at lockbetting.com. So lots of other fights I do like on the main card and on the prelims, but your lock is going to come from two of the fights that we looked at here. We're going to step away from the main event and we are going to put out plays here in a parlay for the co-main and the fight between Ian Garry and Neil Magny. We're going to take Ian Garry at 1-4 minus 400, and we are going to tack on Weili Zhang and Amanda Lemous to not go the distance. So it's fight to go the distance, no. We want that one to finish inside the distance between Weili Zhang and Amanda Lemous. And we want Ian Garry to get his hand raised in any fashion tonight against Neil Magny. The 1-4 minus 400 combined with the 2-5 for Weili Zhang and Amanda Lemous to not go the distance gives you a parlay paying out at 3-4. So that's a £175 return here for this parlay for a £100 stake. So a £75 or $75 profit, whatever your currency here for this lock selection. That's it for me in this edition of The Fight Show. I'll be back with another episode next weekend. Until then, good luck with all your bets as always, and thanks for listening.